When Brian woke the next morning, his legs were cramped and drawn up, and his back hurt when he tried to move. But worst of all was what? So you might have to go back a paragraph. I kind of missed it. But so you can answer question number 2. So what was the most painful thing for Brian? So answer that and come back. His forehead felt massively swollen to the touch, almost like a mound over his eyes, and it was so tender that when his fingers grazed it, he nearly cried. But there was nothing he could do about it, and like the rest of him, it seemed to be bruised more than broken. I'm alive, he thought. I'm alive. It could have been different. There could have been death. I could have been done. Like the pilot, he thought suddenly. The pilot in the plane, down into the water, down into the blue water, strapped in the seat. He sat up, or tried to. The first time he fell back, but on the second attempt, grunting with the effort, he managed to come to a sitting position and scrunched sideways until his back was against a small tree where he sat facing the lake, watching the sky get lighter and lighter with the coming dawn. His clothes were wet and clammy, and there was a faint chill. He pulled the torn remnants of his windbreaker, pieces really, around his shoulders and tried to hold what heat his body could find. He could not think, could not make thought patterns work right. Things seemed to go back and forth between reality and imagination, except that it was all reality. 1 second, he seemed only to have imagined that there was a plane crash, that he had fought out of the sinking plane and swum to shore, that it had all happened to some other person or in a movie playing in his mind. Then he would feel his clothes, wet and cold, and his forehead would slash a pain through his thoughts, but all in a hazed world. So he sat and stared at the lake, felt the pain come and go in waves, and watched the sun come over the end of the lake. It took an hour, perhaps 2. He could not measure time yet and didn't care for the sun to get halfway up. With it came some warmth, small bits of it at first, and with the heat came clouds of insects, thick swarming hordes of mosquitoes that flocked to his body, made a living coat on his exposed skin, clogged his nostrils when he inhaled, poured into his mouth when he opened it to take a breath. It was not possibly believable. Not this. He had come through the crash, but the insects were not possible. He coughed them up, spat them out, sneezed them out, closed his eyes, and kept brushing his face, slapping and crushing them by the dozens, by the hundreds. But as soon as he cleared a place, as soon as he killed them, more came. Thick, whining, buzzing masses of them. Mosquitoes and some small black flies he had never seen before, all biting, chewing, taking from him. So, question number 3. Before the sun came up, Brian was bothered by what? So what was biting at him? What was bothering him when he woke up? So go answer that and come back. In moments his eyes were swollen shut and his face puffy and round to match his battered forehead. He pulled the torn pieces of his windbreaker over his head and tried to shelter in it, but the jacket was full of rips and it didn't work. In desperation he pulled his t-shirt up to cover his face, but that exposed the skin of his lower back, and the mosquitoes and flies attacked the new soft flesh of his back so viciously that he pulled the shirt down. In the end, he sat with the windbreaker pulled up, brushed with his hands, and took it, almost crying in frustration and agony. There was nothing left to do, and when the sun was fully up and heating him directly, bringing steam off his wet clothes and bathing him in warmth, the mosquitoes and flies disappeared. Almost that suddenly. 1 minute he was sitting in the middle of a swarm, the next they were gone and the sun was on him. Vampires, he thought. Apparently they didn't like the deep of night, perhaps because it was too cool, and they couldn't take the direct sunlight. But in that gray time in the morning, when it began to get warm and before the sun was full up and hot, he couldn't believe them. Never in all the reading, in the movies he had watched on television about the outdoors, never once had they mentioned the mosquitoes or flies. All they ever showed on the naturalist shows was the beautiful scenery or animals jumping around having a good time. Nobody ever mentioned mosquitoes and flies. He pulled himself up to stand against the tree and stretched, bringing new aches and pains. His back muscles must have been hurt as well. They almost seemed to tear when he stretched, and while the pain in his forehead seemed to be abating somewhat, just trying to stand made him weak enough to nearly collapse. The back of his hands were puffy, and his eyes were almost swollen shut from the mosquitoes, and he saw everything through a narrow squint. Not that there was much to see, he thought, scratching the bites. In front of him lay the lake, blue and deep. He had a sudden picture of the plane sunk in the lake, down and down in the blue, with the pilot's body still strapped in the seat, his hair waving. He shook his head. More pain. That wasn't something to think about. He looked at his surroundings again. The lake stretched out slightly below him. He was at the base of the L, looking up the long part with the short part out to his right. In the morning light and calm, the water was absolutely perfect, perfectly still. He could see the reflection of the trees at the other end of the lake. Upside down in the water, they seemed almost like another forest, an upside-down forest to match the real one. As he watched, a large bird, he thought it looked like a crow, but it seemed larger, flew from the top, real forest, and the reflection bird matched it, both flying out over the water. Everything was green, so green it went into him. The forest was largely made up of pines and spruce, with stands of some low brush smeared here and there, and thick grass and some other kind of very small brush all over. He couldn't identify most of it, except the evergreens, and some leafy trees he thought might be aspen. He'd seen pictures of aspen in the mountains on the television. The country around the lake was moderately hilly, but the hills were small, almost hummocks, and there were very few rocks except to his left. There lay a rocky ridge that stuck out, overlooking the lake, about 20 feet high. If the plane had come down a little to the left, it would have hit the rocks and never made the lake. He would have been smashed, destroyed. So, question number 7. We're going to skip around a bit again. So, question number 7. Brian thought the place he landed with its brown trees was ugly. True or false? So, that's a true or false question. Did he think that the area that he landed in was ugly? So go answer that question, come back, and we'll finish up. The word came. I would have been destroyed and torn and smashed, driven into the rocks and destroyed. Luck, he thought. I have luck. I have good luck there. But he knew that was wrong. If he had had good luck, his parents wouldn't have divorced because of the secret, and he wouldn't have been flying with a pilot who had a heart attack, and he wouldn't be here where he had to have good luck to keep from being destroyed. So, question number 8. Is Brian is troubled by the secret. True or false? So, that one is a pretty straightforward one, so go answer that one and come back. If you keep walking back from good luck, he thought, you'll come to bad luck. He shook his head again, wincing. Another thing not to think about. The rocky ridge was rounded and seemed to be of some kind of sandstone, with bits of darker stone layered and stuck into it. Directly across the lake from it, at the inside corner of the L, was a mound of sticks and mud rising up out of the water a good 8 or 10 feet. At first, Brian couldn't place it, but he somehow knew what it was. He'd seen it in films. Then a small brown head popped to the surface of the water near the mound and began swimming off down the short leg of the L, leaving a V of ripples behind. And he remembered where he'd seen it. It was a beaver house, called a beaver lodge in a special he'd seen on the public channel. A fish jumped, not a large fish, but it made a big splash near the beaver, and as if by a signal there were suddenly little splops all over the sides of the lake. Along the shore as the fish began jumping, hundreds of them, jumping and slapping the water, Brian watched them for a time, still in the half-daze, still not thinking well. The scenery was very pretty, he thought, and there were new things to look at, but it was all a green and blue blur, and he was used to the gray and black of the city. Traffic, people talking, sounds all the time, the hum and whine of the city. Here at first, it was silent, or he thought it was silent, but when he started to listen, really listen, he heard thousands of things. Hisses and blurts, small sounds, birds singing, hum of insects, splashes from the fish jumping. There was a great noise here, but a noise he did not know, and the colors were new to him, and the colors and noise mixed in his mind to make a green-blue blur he could hear. Here was a hissing pulse sound, and he was still tired, so awfully tired, and standing had taken a lot of energy somehow, had drained him. He supposed he was still in some kind of shock from the crash. And there was still the pain, the dizziness, the strange feeling. He found another tree, a tall pine with no branches until the top, and he sat with his back against it, looking down on the lake, with the sun warming him. And in a few moments he scrunched down and was asleep again. So question number 5. We're going to go back a little bit. Brian had a hard time staying awake after the plane crash. True or false? And then the next question is question 10, which is which sequence best describes the order of events. So look at the events listed and look at the options of the orders and try and piece it together and look at each option. So put all the events in order of how they went and find which order from the multiple choice best fits the way you put it together. So then, after you do that, question number 11. The author of Hatchet, Gary Paulson, most likely wrote Hatchet to what? So why do you think Gary Paulson wrote Hatchet? And then number 12 is your last question. Which statement from Hatchet contains a cause-effect relationship? So a cause-effect relationship is this happened because of this. So this was the cause of what happened, and this was what happened because something happened. So there has to be a cause for an effect, and an effect has to have a cause. So this happened because of this. Okay? So go ahead, answer those questions, and we are done with chapters 3 and 4 for today. I hope this helped out again, and I will see you all next time. Bye.